Welcome to a very special Department of Tangents minicast, an interview flashback with the legendary John Cleese. I spoke with Cleese for the Boston Globe in 2015 when he came to town on tour with his memoir, So Anyway, which is a fantastically funny book and an essential read for any fan of Monty Python, Fawlty Towers, or just funny people in general. Cleese was an intimidating interview in some ways, mainly because there are few living comedians whose work has been as analyzed and parsed as his, especially his work with the Pythons. So what do you ask the person who has been asked everything? We had an enjoyably winding conversation talking about the book, tropes about the psychology of comedy, and perhaps the preeminent element of Cleese's personal philosophy, flexibility. I started out asking what he'd most like to avoid addressing yet again.
So I wanted to start by asking if there's one question you're utterly tired of answering so I can avoid that.
Yes, why did you call Monty Python's Flying Circus? It's nothing wrong with the question. It's just a very boring answer, and it's a rather long one. So you make up joke questions, but there's certain questions that lead to fun, and certain questions that don't. And on the whole, when people try to ask funny questions, it's much harder to be funny than if they ask straight questions. And if they ask straight questions for information, sometimes there's nothing wrong, except the information is not very interesting. Like when people say, "What is your favorite sketch?" I've no idea why that's thought to be an interesting question. Yeah?
Yes. And you say in the book that your second memory is a rabbit attack? Are you sure you're not just baiting obsessive Python fans with throwing that in there?
No, people always do this. If you mention anything from your childhood and then 40 years later it turns out people think, there must be a connection there. The answer is no. I mentioned the rabbit attack because I think it's so funny to be bitten by a rabbit, you know? It's so pathetic, but I know it had nothing to do with the later Holy Grail thing. People make those connections, but 90% of the time there's no connection at all.
Well, at this point, is there anything you can say that somebody wouldn't make a connection to Monty Python?
Say again?
At this point, is there anything you could say that somebody wouldn't eventually make a connection to Monty Python somewhere?
It depends on the person I'm talking to.
Yes. Well, one thing it might seem strange, the book is very funny, which is not always the case when a comedian writes an autobiography.
Yes, that's right, Nick. People have remarked on that. You see, I don't know what the answer is. My observation is that the old cliche about Pagliacci, one of the miserable crowd, the Brock who goes to the London psychiatrist. You know that story?
Yes.
All that stuff. I mean, I think it sort of appeals to people because, it's a good story. But I have to say, when I've been looking around the last few years, I've seen various people who are in various degrees troubled. And it seems to me that people being fairly troubled is not infrequent these days, and they can be found in all sorts of jobs, not just in comedy. So, if you think of some of the comedians that I know, like Steve Coogan and particularly fond of Michael Palin, obviously, and Eddie Izzard, I have no idea if they have mournful backgrounds, but I certainly am not aware of it myself. So I think that it's a cliche that people can can grab hold of, which is that explains it. That kind of thinking, And in fact, I think there's a lot of troubled people out there, and I think in particular the CEOs. I think of a very substantial number of CEOs and those kind of extremely powerful people are basically sociopaths. I think sociopaths are not necessarily depressed, but I have a feeling deep down that he's missing some of the better things in life. So, no, I don't know if it's true that there is that connection statistically, but I can see why people embrace it.
Well, I, for one, am sick of the trope of the sad dentist.
Say that again a little louder, Nick. Sorry.
I, for one, am tired of the trope of the sad dentist.
Well, they do have the highest suicide rate of any of the professions. You know.
Okay, yes, I have read that. That's
yeah.
But did you?
I was told that by my dentist a few years ago in London, so I imagine there's some truth.
Hopefully not just before he worked on you.
No, he'd just been shaken up by the fact that he'd realized that four of his friends had had heart attacks in their early 40s. I do remember that, actually. It was about 20 years ago.
So did you set out with an idea that you wanted to make the book funny and not sort of a dry autobiography?
Oh, yes. I think my sense of humor is absolutely central to my personality. And whatever I was trying to say, I would prefer to say it humorously because I think it's more interesting. I think there are some things it's perfectly acceptable to address them seriously, not solemnly. I don't see any point in getting solemn about anything unless it's a state funeral. You know, people confuse serious and solemn, and you can be talking about something very serious like a children's education. You still be laughing. It's a serious subject. Solemn is something quite different. So I think humor and a humorous attitude is genuinely intrinsic to my personality, in that I wouldn't really try and write anything I think that wasn't humorous. It's very hard for me to want to write anything other than perhaps a thriller. But otherwise, I think that to see the amusing side of things is, in psychiatric language, a very healthy defense, given that life can be difficult sometimes.
You've mentioned the importance of flexibility in comedy and life.
Yes.
And would you say that's the chief rule, remain flexible?
I think that's right. Yes, I think that is right. I think if you're not taken over by inappropriate emotions, then that means necessarily that you can remain flexible, and that means you can make the right decisions as opposed to sort of making, as it were, obsessional ones. So I think it's a good principle. I think the other thing is that when people are in a more relaxed state of mind, they're certainly much more creative than when they're anxious. And they're not only more creative, I think obviously they're a bit more happy. And when you're in a relaxed state of mind, then humor is part of that. Humor is part of that relaxation. You know, people talk about a sense of humor failure, but that doesn't happen when you're relaxed. Does that all make sense?
Yes. And it seems hard to triangulate just how you feel about your career and your legacy, at least publicly. You said you're very happy to have made people laugh and had an impact on people, but you look at your career as almost something you did for a laugh. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes, I don't think it was ever as important to me as it was to some people. I think some people have made their lives subordinate to their career. You know, they choose that. They live to work. And I don't think that's ever been true of me, except when neuroses have taken over. Like when I felt, as I've always, one of my problems in life is that I never bothered to take the financial side of things terribly seriously. I never said to my accountant, how much do I have? I would say, do I have enough? Do I need to go out and get another job? And there have been some times when I didn't know whether I had enough, particularly earlier in my life, and I was loath to say no to any offer. I think a lot of young people are like that in my business. You know, they don't want to say no to anything because they slightly frightened that people might be cross with them. but also they might be missing out on something. So that introduces a sort of an element of compulsion into your decision-making, which doesn't leave you very flexible. But when you can just sit back and say, well, I would like to do that, and I need to do that, and so forth, and just take those into account without being obsessed about, let me tell you something. One of my closest friends is William Goldman, the screenwriter, who wrote Butch Cassidy and All the President's Men. And he said to me once about Hollywood, he said, you have to realize that Hollywood stars wake up in the morning with one thought in their mind, which is, how can I be a bigger star tonight than I am this morning? And that, I think, is a terribly unhealthy attitude in life, and one that's not going to make you happy. And if, as Robin Skinner, the psychiatrist who wrote 2 books with, said, if you can do something that you basically enjoy, then if you get a lot of success on the top, then that's the what's the word? That's the cream on top of the cake. You're basically doing something that you like. But I would say that if I have to earn money, then making people laugh is the nicest possible way to do it.
Well,
but if I had a lot of money, I don't know how much time I would spend making people laugh. If I did, it would certainly be through writing, because the other odd thing about my personality is that I've always got far more satisfaction from writing than I have ever from performing. If I do a day's performance on a film, I often feel really quite depleted at the end of it, because it's very demanding in some ways in terms of one's attention and one's energy. But at the end of it, I very seldom have that feeling of, well, that was a good day's work. I think, yeah, that was fine, that was okay, but I don't feel deeply satisfied. Whereas if I have a day where I write, let's say, 700 or 800 words, which I think are genuinely funny, that gives me a much more of a sense of completion that I've done something worthwhile.
If you didn't know, April 22nd is Record Store Day, and if you're a Fawlty Towers fan, Record Store Day 2017 will be your favorite Record Store Day because there is a Fawlty Towers picture disc coming out featuring audio from the Mrs. Richards and Hotel Inspectors episodes. I asked Cleese about Basil Fawlty and his thoughts on why the character and the show have been so misunderstood.
You talked in the book about how people analyzing Basil Fawlty anger got it completely wrong. Have you seen a lot of really bad interpretations of Monty Python or Fawlty Towers or anything you've done? People got it really wrong?
Well, whenever anyone sent me a script, and I used to get quite a lot that was to do with Basil, they never understood that Basil used to get so frustrated and frightened and angry because of the build-up of circumstances. All those Fawlty Towers are just little farces. But he's not like that at the beginning of the show. And they just write stuff where he walks straight in, angry, and starts insulting people. Of course, it's not the slightest bit funny. What is funny is when the circumstances build up to irritate him, and more things frustrate him. And that's the basis of all farce, is, that Daniel Goleman book's Emotional Intelligence. I think it has one of the most important phrases I've ever come across, which is stress makes you stupid. When people are stressed, they make bad decisions. And the point of a farce is that you stress the characters more and more, and they make more and more worse decisions. Do you see what I mean? So people don't understand that you have to build the character, and as a piece of writing, very few people have ever grasped it. And on the 3 occasions that American television tried to take Fawlty Towers and make it into an American show, on those occasions they absolutely failed. Although they were entirely confident that they didn't need any sort of help or suggestions from me. No, we know how to do this. And then they made 3 really dreadful attempts at it, one of which involved writing Basil out of the show so that he didn't actually appear. That was the one they did with, be Arthur.
Mhm.
So most people don't seem to know how to write that, but I have to tell you, Nick, my experience is there's an amazing number of people around who are good actors or actresses. Amazing number. Extraordinary how much talent there is. But writing, it's the opposite. There are very, very few people who can write really good comedy. Tiny number. And maybe that's why they can't write Basil Fawlty, but they certainly don't understand how to make the character funny. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yes, well, I was wondering how often also people misunderstood, even more than just Fawlty Towers, anything you've done. I know it happened with Life of Brian as well, with the debates.
Oh, yes, people misunderstand things all the time, that's right. Well, everyone has a different take on everything. I mean, if you go to a dinner party with 8 people, and then you ask them afterwards to write an account of the party, then all 8 people would have a different version of what happened, you know. There's a wonderful book called Wittgenstein's Poker. Have you ever come across that?
No.
It's about a debate between Wittgenstein and Karl Popper that took place at Cambridge once, and everyone in the room were really top-class philosophers. About 2/3 of them were famous, and they all have a completely different account of what happened.
Dear Young,